Hi all, today I'm going to be telling you my review of Romeo and Juliet on Broadway. It just opened in previews and I was just so excited to see it. I was super lucky and got a ticket with a promo code, so thank you so much. But yeah, let's get into the review. To start off, I'm gonna be looking down a little because I have my notes here, so if I'm looking down, just know I'm referencing my notes. I did buy this ticket because I really wanted to see Rachel Zegler perform in person. She has such an amazing voice, and even though it's a play, I did hear she was singing a little bit, so I was very excited. But I will say that after watching it, I think Kit Connor stole the show for me. He was my favorite part because he just really played Romeo so well. I feel like Romeo is such an iconic and funny character because he really confuses lust for love a lot, like a lot of the time. And I feel like all of his claims for love for Juliet, especially at the beginning, is really just Romeo being horny. And I feel like Kit really played into that. So I really like that. And then also he had great comedic timing. So during his monologue before the balcony scene, he was actually running around the theater. Well, not like running, but like going around the theater. And he was in the standing room. So for context, the circle and the square is a theater where you have like the circle in the middle and then there's like people like all around it. So he was like in the standing room doing his monologue, kind of being in love or like lusting depending on your interpretation after Juliet. And I feel like the way he paused, it was funny and I just really enjoyed it. And then I also appreciated that they did choreograph him going around the whole theater because the theater is quite small, the stage is quite small, and by having Juliet come down in her like balcony bed over the center of the stage and him going around the theater, it created some distance and then also created this like audience interaction with the actors. So this wasn't the only instance of them doing that. There were other moments where the audience members were interacting with them, but yeah, I really enjoyed that choice, especially since the circle was so tiny in the middle. Of course, getting to the reason why I initially bought my ticket to see the show, Rachel also had an amazing performance. So I will say, because I was saying that I wanted to see her singing, that the singing did seem a bit forced at some points. Obviously, Romeo and Juliet is a play, and they made it so that there were some songs within. And of course, like, I love her voice, but it was a little bit weird at some points, I would say, because like it seemed like they knew that she had an amazing voice and they were like, how do we add her singing, versus like, oh, like let's add singing in like the most reasonable way. I don't know if I said that properly, but yeah, like in musicals you have like singing when like the emotion becomes like so strong and like too great, and like the songs are used to convey like this character is super passionate about this is what they value, this is what they're looking for, like these are the character's motivations. Versus in this, because there were so few moments of singing, it seemed very inconsistent at like what emotional points like song was justified. And that's why I feel like it was more like, oh my gosh, we have Rachel, let's have her sing, versus, oh, let's see how we can actually like add music to this play. So I think they nonetheless showcased her amazing singing abilities. Like she was singing like so well. Like at some point she was like sitting and then going to lying down and then like sitting back up while singing, and I was just like, the breath control, all of that, incredible. But yeah, I feel like the singing was more of an afterthought than something that they were originally intending to do, which might be wrong, but that's just how it came off to me. But yeah, but my favorite part of her performance for sure was, so after Romeo gets banished, she has to like hide her sadness and be like, oh, like I'm not sad about his banishment, I'm sad about my cousin's death, because like Tybalt is dead at the hands of Romeo. And I feel like her pauses, like her tone and all of that was just, it like displayed how sad she was but also made it so funny, and I feel like the audience was eating that up. So I really enjoyed that. And then also her interactions with her parents, the nurse, like it just really made me invested in Juliet as a character, because I feel like Juliet is often portrayed as very naive because she's 13, almost 14, and that's like very fixated on in the story. But I feel like Rachel's perception and how she played Juliet made it so it was more like, yes, she's young, but she understands her reality. Like, she understands she's going to be forced into a marriage. She understands that there are things going on around her that are out of her control, and she is trying to make the most out of the situation she's in, even though she still is a very young girl. So I really appreciated that from Rachel's performance, because I feel like sometimes Juliet is kind of seen as someone who's like just a hopeless romantic falling in love, versus like, I'll talk about this more, but I think that the way I saw Juliet in this performance was someone who was, yes, falling in love, but also seeing that as her opportunity to escape all of the societal structures that she was currently in. So let's talk about the interactions between Romeo and Juliet. I think there are 4 big ones that I want to talk about, so let's get started. So there's, of course, where they meet. So I think this started off really well. So Juliet has this moment where she's singing, so of course they use that to have Rachel singing, which I think was, honestly, like, that singing, it fit well, it made sense to me. For some reason they had her using a handheld mic, which it makes me curious how the audio and sound works for that, but yeah, I don't know. Interesting choice, but yeah, I love that they had her singing there because it sounded great. It fit like what was actually going on in the play. And then it of course gave Romeo the chance to ask the serving man, like, who is that girl singing? Which honestly, if I were at that party too, I would also be asking, like, who is that girl singing? Because Rachel has an incredible voice. So of course she's singing, and then eventually they lock eyes across the room, which I think is a little bit harder to display on stage than in some sort of like film or like TV. So I like how they had like everyone go onto the ground, and then they were like locking eyes across everyone at the ground. So you still got the context, like, yes, they're in the middle of the party, but you also got the fact that it was like very clear that they're looking at each other, they're like walking around the stage, and they're still like locking eyes. So I feel like that it like gave the proper first impression that like it was very instant when they saw each other, that there was some sort of crush, infatuation, something going on where they caught each other's eyes. And then in terms of after the party, there is the scene of them walking around where Romeo is following Juliet. And this might just be me being distracted, but them walking in the circles, I was immediately like, Hades Town. Like, the stage should start moving. Which, yeah, that's on me getting distracted. But yeah, I think it was good to see them, like, it gave the illusion that they were like distancing themselves from the party, and I appreciate that they did that, but I just found it a little funny at one point because like one of them stopped and the other one walked around the stage to like meet back up with them, and I was just like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like having them wander through the audience, kind of like they do at other points, could have been like more impactful, but maybe it was like a timing thing, and like they wanted to stay on stage because it's like faster to loop around the small circle than the big whole circle. But yeah, I think this scene, in partnership with the Rosaline scene, did a really good job at establishing that like Romeo is a lustful person. Like, he's complaining about Rosaline, like, she is chaste, she does not want to do anything, and now I'm heartbroken because of that. And then immediately going to a party and being like, oh my god, this girl Juliet, I'm in love with her. Like, I feel like you can see it's very much attraction based for Romeo based on that. And then this scene in partnership with the scene talking about how Juliet is about to become 14, she should be married, like there are girls her age who already have kids. I feel like it highlights that Juliet is looking at this opportunity as some sort of like optimism of like having a connection to really like anyone instead of an arranged marriage, or like having someone who like sees her for her instead of arranged marriage, which I feel like Romeo does not necessarily see her for her. Maybe he sees a great singer, maybe he sees like an attractive girl, but I think Juliet is really looking at the optimistic side of this and is like, no, like this is an opportunity for like true connection, and it's not something that's being forced upon her by her parents. The next scene I want to talk about is, of course, the balcony interaction. So I feel like the actors' chemistry was just incredible. Like, I really could believe that they could be falling in love, even though in my interpretation of Romeo and Juliet, they're like not actually in love. But that's up to personal opinion. But their chemistry was great. I really enjoyed the choreography of this scene. So it was a little bit at the expense of an audience member, because, okay, Kit as Romeo, he like is talking to her. There's this bed above the stage that's like coming down, and it's just like levitating there attached to the wires. And so Kit is like looking up at Rachel, and of course they're like out of reach of each other. So what does Romeo have to do to actually touch Juliet? He goes and asks an audience member for their chair so he can stand on it. So I thought that was funny. I don't know how I'd feel about that as an audience member though, because I will say the chair was on stage for like the whole rest of the scene. And I looked online, and from what I can tell, I think that seat was about $600 unless they got some sort of discount. So I don't know, I feel like you're paying $600, you get to be a little bit involved, but also you're paying $600 and your seat is like on stage and you're sitting on the stairs watching this balcony scene. So I'd be very curious to know how the person whose chair got taken felt about it. But it was definitely very cute. He got the chair, he went up and was holding Rachel's hands, and I feel like it highlighted the absurdity of the desperation to have that connection, even though they had just met. And it also like changed the dynamic, and you got to see more of their chemistry because now they were like physically closer to each other. They were able to hold hands, and yeah, I feel like it's just like, I'm so curious what that person thought with their chair being stolen, because I kept thinking like, oh, like when are they gonna give the chair back? And they just like kept talking to each other, and the chair was just like on stage. So yeah. And then okay, so Rachel, of course, as Juliet, is getting called, and she just gets harsher and harsher with responding to like being called away. And I feel like that was so adorable because she uses the softest tone with Romeo, but then she's like, leave me alone, pretty much, to the people calling her. And I feel like that's like, I don't know, I really enjoyed that. And it was like the romance, even though, yeah, I don't know, I really enjoyed their interaction together, their chemistry. And of course there's the iconic part, which I think has been now illegally filmed and posted on some social media platforms, where Romeo jumps up, holds onto the edge of the bed, and does a pull-up to then kiss Juliet, which during that moment I was like, wait, this is really romantic. Like, even if I don't think they're actually in love and it's like too fast, and I really question Romeo's intentions, like the way they choreographed that scene was incredible. It really captured everyone's attention, and yeah, you're like, there's still a small part of you, like even if you're doubting if it's truly love, like you're still like, what if it is? And you're invested in their relationship because it's just so adorable. Like at this point, like yes, you saw Romeo complaining about like chastity with Rosaline, but here it's like very innocent still, and so you kind of like are hoping that like Romeo is not purely thinking about lust, and he's like actually caring and crushing on Juliet, and they'll get to learn more about each other. So I really enjoyed that. And then also like at some points where like Romeo leaves and then Juliet calls him back, like Kit running back and forth was very funny, and I feel like they played in the comedic side of things even though it was supposed to be a very like romantic scene. So I really enjoyed that. And then of course there's the proposal of marriage, which I think emphasizes Romeo's horniness, because I think it's just like a sign that like, even though this interaction is very innocent, I feel like he's looking for more, and I feel like marriage is the fastest way to get there without entering any sort of scandal between the houses. Well, like obviously there's scandal, but like the least amount of scandal where Romeo won't end up dead. And then I think that for Juliet, I think it highlights her desire to marry someone who she has a connection with, and who she could possibly trust. Because I think she sees her parents' marriage and how people in society are treated around her, and Romeo really wooing her, being romantic, like that is what Juliet is looking for. So I think while some people might portray this decision as naive, I think Rachel kind of takes it a different direction, where you see that, like, even though Juliet is 13 years old, soon to be 14, she understands the limitations within marriage, that she needs to get married soon to have any sort of possible autonomy over herself. And so it's kind of like she's looking at like what her parents are doing. She's feeling that desperation to escape the situation. She's having some optimism that maybe Romeo's a way out. And then she's also like kind of adoring him. She has that crush. So I really don't think it's necessarily naivety, but rather like an opportunity to kind of like change her path and maybe end up with something different from the societal norm. And then now I'm gonna skip the marriage. Don't think that's as relevant, and go right to the consummation of the marriage. I think this highlights the strength of the infatuation and attraction between the characters, but it's of course overshadowed by Romeo's statements about Rosaline's desire to stay chaste, and also the fact that Juliet's only 13. Like, I know that in some adaptations of Romeo and Juliet, they try and age the character similarly, but in this production, they kept it to where she is 13 going on 14, and Romeo is clearly older than that. So I feel like even though it's like, oh, they're consummating it, he's gonna have to run away soon, like, oh my gosh, these two lovebirds are going to be separated, you're still like concerned for Juliet. Because like no matter which path Juliet takes, she's under control of someone, whether it's her parents, Pérez, Romeo. There's so many people that are really vying for control over Juliet, whether they're thinking about it or not. And it's just like very sad to see Juliet as a 13-year-old having to make such big life choices because they're the only choices she can make. And honestly, Rachel's acting at the end of the scene stood out to me because Romeo leaving isn't just like her losing love, or like love, however you want to interpret that, but it's also losing a lot of autonomy, because you see that Pérez as a suitor is soon to be forced upon her, and it's really a request from her parents, but it's not. So she's losing any chance at that, and I feel like later I'll talk about Pérez, but Pérez is not the kind of person that I think Juliet is looking for in marriage. He's obviously very controlling, and just like everything we've seen of Pérez so far is very patriarchal, and I feel like Romeo feels like an escape from that to Juliet because she hasn't seen him fully in those contexts. And then finally, there's the death scene, which is their fourth major interaction with each other, even though one of them is asleep or dead in both situations. And I think both the actors did a really incredible job emphasizing how wild of an emotional roller coaster it has been for them. Like, they're deeply feeling one end of the spectrum all the way to the other end of the spectrum, from like happiness to despair. And I feel like they both have really strong stage presence. So they really like grab you in when they're monologuing about each other, when they're deciding to go through with death. And you really feel the gravity of the situation. So even though you may not believe that they're truly in love or understand their intentions fully, I feel like you are still like sad for them and like really begging them to just like sit with your decision a little bit longer, like think about it a little bit more. Like, this is not a life or death situation, and it's even more of not of a life or death situation because you know that one of them is just asleep. You know that Juliet is just sleeping there and not truly dead. So yeah, I feel like I enjoyed it, but oh my gosh, I was just like, please. Which, I mean, I feel like that's the intention of the scene, so I'm glad they evoked that. Okay, so we talked about Romeo and Juliet. Yes, they're the title characters, but let's move on to the rest of the cast and also some other choices made in the production. So for context, the rest of the cast is structured so that there are people playing multiple. Let me show you. They gave us this nice little diagram. So you can see how, of course, like Capulet, Lady Capulet, same person, Nurse and Tybalt, same person, like there's a lot of people who are playing multiple characters in this production. So I feel like that was nice in terms of keeping this cast small, but also I feel like that could also contribute to some confusion on the stage. So in terms of like the actual performance of it, I think it was actually incredible to see performers just like flipping that switch between scenes. Sometimes like they're on stage and they're switching characters like on stage actively, and it seems very fun but also very challenging. So I have a lot of admiration for the ability to do that. But I think with this design and also the split between obviously the Montagues and the Capulets, I think that there were some better costuming choices that could have been made. For example, I think the Capulets could have been in like warm colors, so like reds, oranges, pinks, golds during the party scene. And then the Montagues could have been in colder colors like blues, greens, silvers, and it could have just created a nicer juxtaposition on stage that was a little bit easier to follow, especially in scenes where they weren't immediately fighting or you're like across the room looking across. You could very easily be like, okay, I know who that is, I know what side they're on. I feel like it could have been really nice. I did appreciate though with the double casting that there were changes in costumes between the characters. They take off a vest, put on a vest, put on a jacket, take off a jacket. I feel like that was definitely helpful, but I feel like it definitely could have been more clear if you had like colors going through the different parts of the cast. And then especially with like Friar Lawrence, you could have had them be like purple, showing that like they're not really on either side, but they're interacting with both sides. But moving on to cast specific things, I really enjoyed Gabby's performance. So as the friar, like the character was like really able to pull you out of the delusion that Romeo and Juliet were in for their love for each other, while also he was like actively enabling them to do stupid things. So I feel like characters like that are just so funny and fun because they're like, let's add common sense into the situation, but let's also be more delusional at the same time. And I feel like Gabby just executed really well on that. And then she also played Mercutio, which was my favorite death in the entire show. Sorry, Romeo and Juliet, not my favorite deaths. But during like the period right before the death, Gabby is like performing and like actively blaming Romeo for her death. And it's like really sad and uncomfortable because obviously Romeo and Mercutio are friends, and you know that Mercutio didn't start the fight, like Tybalt did, and Romeo was only trying to prevent the fight from occurring. Like he was trying to get his friends out safely. He was like, let's not fight. And it's just like really heartbreaking in that moment to see like these friends, like as one of them is dying, the other one is placing like all of the blame and guilt and is honestly like severing that friendship as they're dying. And like it's an inevitable death. Like you see on stage like there's no chance that Mercutio is going to survive. And I just can't imagine like having your friend die and then placing all of that guilt on you as they're dying. And yeah, I feel like yes, there's the heartbreak at the end of the show where you're like, oh my gosh, they could have been in love. But like that love to me is not as strong as the love seen in the friendships in this play, because like they've been friends a long time. And it's honestly just, yeah, it's really sad to see like friends blaming each other when they were just trying to do what was best for each other. And like I know that intentions don't translate to actions, and obviously in this case it definitely didn't. Like one of them ends up dead. But yeah, I feel like that moment was like very crushing because like imagine being Romeo and like your friend is blaming you for everything. Like I would be like overcome with grief, not only that I'm losing my friend, but also that my friend is like, this is all on you. Like this is your fault that I'm dead now. But yeah, so very sad, but moving on. Okay, I really enjoyed Gían's performance too. I think he was super critical for setting the tone at many points. So, for example, at the beginning, he has this whole thumb-biting performance to make it clear how the Montagues and the Capulets interact with each other, and the whole crazy house rivalry in Verona that's going on. And then also his role as Pérez, I feel like really emphasized how much marriage is being forced upon Juliet. And during the church scene where they're both there and he's like, oh yeah, you love me, like we're getting married and all of that, like you can tell how uncomfortable Juliet is. And I just feel like it was so critical to show Juliet's understanding of the world around her. And I also just think he had really stellar comedic timing. I feel like he had me engaged and laughing a lot, so his performance was incredible. Sola was also really entertaining to watch as Capulet and Lady Capulet. I think by having him play both these roles, I think incredible choice. He had to make really clear decisions about how to emphasize which character he was when interacting with Rachel as Juliet, which I thought really helped you understand the difference between Juliet's parents' motivations and what they were trying to get out of her. Because I think that at the end you see the reaction to Juliet's death. And I think it emphasizes that like parents can like try and push their vision on their children as much as possible. Like you're gonna be like, I know what's best for you, you're gonna do this. But the child still has some sort of autonomy. It might not be as much as the parents, but they can still do stupid things that can get them into trouble and also diverge from their parents' plans. And so it's kind of like, even though like as a parent you can push so much for your child to do something like beneficial for you or for them, like you're ultimately just pushing them away if they're not on the same page as you. And if you push too hard, you're going to lose your child in the process. Now in this process, they like lose her to death, like they actually lose her. But I think you can also see this being like, you can lose an emotional connection to your child. And I really enjoyed Sola's performance. Like, I feel like I'm talking about sad things, but there are also comedic parts, but yeah, great performance. And then Tommy was both Tybalt and the nurse, which I think is really iconic because then you get to cry about your own death on stage. Like, I don't know, getting to grieve yourself seems kind of fun. And as the nurse, which is Juliet's nurse, she shows how characters can take control of like the little information they're given. Like the nurse is not super high status in this show. And obviously like in the house, she's like pretty much just serving anything that Juliet needs or wants. But she can control some things in Juliet's life because she's getting all the information from Romeo. She can cause major delays for the information about the marriage ceremony. And I feel like the highlighting of how these people in lower positions of power can take control of situations was really interesting, but also super funny because all the pauses and delaying as like Juliet is just there like exacerbated, like just tell me, am I getting married today? I think was very fun. And then, okay, as Tybalt, I feel like the death at Romeo's hands was just an incredible performance because the way that they choreographed it, I personally think it gave Romeo a pretty long time and a chance to walk away because it starts with like Tybalt getting beat and then it ends with Tybalt being suffocated by Romeo, which takes a while to achieve. Like you have to consistently be obstructing that airway to ultimately lead to someone's death. So I think that this makes it super clear that even though Romeo is like defending himself, he also had the chance to walk away and leave Tybalt just wounded. And I don't think that Romeo had to kill Tybalt. Like Juliet chooses to believe that it's a necessity. Like if Romeo hadn't killed my cousin, like my husband would not be here today. Like I think that the way they show it, like Romeo is not as black and white as that. And I feel like it leaves him in a gray area, which I very much prefer over a black and white character. And I feel like that's all because of the choreography between Tommy and Kit, so amazing. And then Taheen was also really entertaining as Benvolio because he had to deal with all of Romeo's antics about love, and his reactions were truly what was needed because, like, as a friend, if my friend was doing that, I'd be like, are you serious right now? Like, what is going on? So he's really trying to put some sense into Romeo's head. And I think it's very iconic that he's ultimately the one who's like, there are other fair women out there, which was very cool because they actually pointed at an audience member as an example of like, there's a beautiful woman, like there are other beautiful women out here, like you just gotta go look for them. He's the one who gets him to go to the Capulet party, which ultimately leads to his dad, which I think shows that like even well-meaning friends whose intentions are stellar don't always translate into reality, because like Romeo ends up dead because of this. And like obviously Romeo made lots of choices himself, he has autonomy, but yeah, things don't always go as you plan when you give advice. And then he was also the apothecary, which was also hilarious, and I did not expect him to be chopping up that bear to go get the poison, so a great performance. And Daniel's performance was also like an excellent and funny introduction to the feud between houses. So he had a bunch of banter with Samson, and it had me laughing because it kind of displays like how trivial but also possibly deadly the nature of the rivalry is. And he also explains why he hasn't gotten the note to Romeo as Friar John. And that was just like, he was explaining all these things that were going wrong. And I feel like if the other friar had just explained how urgent it needed to be, maybe he would have been willing to let it go out of his hand to actually get to Romeo. But since he only had the amount of information he had, and he was only told like, oh, you have to deliver this personally to Romeo, like what needed to be done just was not done. And it's like a great example how like not understanding the urgency of a task and giving instructions that don't clearly communicate that leads to someone not being able to do a task properly. Like Friar Lawrence needs, like, he dropped the ball on that one, let's be honest. But yeah, I appreciated that dynamic between the two friars. And then Jasai as Gregory also helped us understand the dynamic in Verona, but it also set up Romeo for his death because he was a serving man who said who Juliet was when she was like singing and first caught Romeo's eye. And honestly, as Gregory, his interactions with the Capulets always made you think about the fact that like something stupid could be starting soon, and like it's really at any moment. Like both sides are just like being so stupid in so many ways, and they were always just ready to attack each other. So I appreciated how he contributed to that dynamic. And then Nihar aided in the establishment of the environment too, while also being the best messenger, like in the worst way, because his performance, he like really emphasized that like there are always constant fighting words, there are sometimes actual fights between the houses, and this dynamic is just like, even if Romeo and Juliet were not like falling in love, like something was going to go wrong at some point. So like no matter what happens, like someone's going to end up dead, someone's going to end up making a stupid comment, like something is always going to go wrong. And then on the messenger side, he is the one who delivers the note to Romeo about the death of Juliet, even though she's not actually dead. And I feel like this was a really great performance because you see how hesitant he is to break Romeo's heart while also knowing he must be informed, because would you rather Romeo learn from someone else or learn from like someone he's actually close to? So I feel like his dynamic with Kit during this scene was just really great. And I appreciated also how they added him to earlier scenes, because Balthazar is not explicitly like mentioned in earlier acts from my understanding, but they found ways to integrate him in, which I really appreciated. And then now for some like more comparisons, I think something obvious in New York that you'd want to compare this to is Shakespeare in the Park. So that is a free event that takes place in Central Park, and currently it's 2024, so it's not occurring because they're doing renovations to the theater. But in summer of 2023, I was able to go and see Hamlet perform before the closure for renovations. And so I just wanted to do some quick comparisons because this ticket for me was approximately $90 because I got a promo code, and that was down from the regular price of my seat, which would have been $160. So I will say I was disappointed in how plain the stage was. I understand that there are limitations with having a circle stage in the center. You obviously can't have any huge set pieces that would obstruct views and allow you to see less of the characters, but I really expected there to be some more decoration, at least to certain extents. I understand that it could be hard to move it on and off stage, but I think at the price tag, there just needs to be more done with the decorations, because like I understand that you modernize the characters, you modernize their outfits, so let's also modernize the decor, like at least give some more decor. Yeah, I just think the stage was very plain, and I was kind of disappointed with that, especially for the price I was paying. But yeah, but overall, I think that the play was really good. It was amazing to watch the chemistry unfold between all of the characters, not only romantically, but within different friendships and dynamics. But there's definitely certain things that I'm just like, maybe we could tweak that a little bit, whether it be the decor, maybe making the transition to singing a little bit more smooth, or adding singing to maybe a few other parts so it doesn't seem as disjointed when the singing does come up for Juliet. And also just like the costuming changes I think could help a lot, because where I was sitting there were a couple girls next to me who had not read Romeo and Juliet recently. They weren't as familiar with the story, and I think it was a lot harder for them to track who was in what house. Like obviously once they started fighting you could be like, oh, like obviously they're on opposite sides, but I think just like having some sort of color that helped define what side people were on would be super helpful and make it more clear from an audience's perspective. Because I understand like at some points, like I think Kit was intentionally put in a white shirt so you could see blood going onto like what he was wearing, which totally makes sense. But I feel like there are other ways to tie in, to show very clearly, like, this person's a Montague, this person's a Capulet. You see that right away as soon as they get on stage, no matter if they're like slightly in the dark or whatever, like you get that very clear identification of characters. Anyway, I really enjoyed it. I am happy. Like this is probably the most I've paid for a ticket in a very long time, because I'm definitely a rush and lottery person, but I am honestly very excited to see what a lot of these people continue to do. Yeah, I want to see Rachel in like a real musical, so hopefully after this will be a great stepping stone. Kit, I will definitely be looking into more of the things he's done in the past, because I was honestly very unfamiliar with his work, so I'm very excited about that. And yeah, I am just so excited to see how everyone else feels about the show, because I feel like it definitely had some like really stellar standout moments, and it was definitely very popular when I was there. Like the whole thing was full, even with people standing. So please let me know if I missed anything down below. I really would love to hear what everyone else is thinking about this, because I'm definitely a musical girl over like a play person. So I did appreciate the some singing. But yeah, thank you so much for such an incredible performance, and maybe I'll start doing these more often. Okay, bye.